hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good wherever you are in this beautiful world. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And yes, I am in the dark again. Load shedding here. So, thank you for joining. And I have with me on Aquarius Rising today, Lynn, Monèt. And Jerry Marzinsky is obviously supposed to join us, but he has had trouble getting in to the, for some reason he can't get into StreamYard today. So I'm still hoping that he will join. But if not, we will definitely reschedule another another show with him as well. This week has been a comedy of this happening, I want to tell you. And I hope my internet is better, because I know earlier on when I had Caleb, oh, hello, Caleb, there you are. Caleb and Brock from the Sarah 17 on, and my internet was shocking. So I hope it's better. I was on the phone to my internet company. They've rebooted me and done all sorts of things. So let's hope that's sorted. But so welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Lynn, it's so good to have you. And I know Jerry was speaking with me the last time about you. So I was really excited to have you. Goeiemiddag, Duke. Goeienaand. There's no goeienaand word.
It's my pleasure. That's okay. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really was looking forward to this.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to it. So I'm sorry that Jerry is not in, but as I said, I hope that he will still get in. I'll just check the back room, but gosh, what a crazy time.
It is.
Otherwise,
I'm sorry.
No, carry on.
Okay.
Carry on.
As you and I were speaking beforehand, that a lot of times when you're speaking on this sort of subject, these type of things happen because spiritually, and sometimes the darker forces they like to be acknowledged, but they don't like being exposed. So they will tinker. They'll tinker with the electronics. They'll mess with your lighting system. They'll tap on things just to kind of distract away. So I'm hoping he'll be able to overcome that and get on here with us. I'm going to think positive, manifest him coming on. So
exactly. Well, it's so true, because we certainly have enough experience with tinkering of our electronics and of our system. That's for sure. Deal with that so often. But anyway, I would love to hear, maybe you can just tell our viewers, just give us a little bit of a background on yourself. You've also got a pretty interesting experience, life, etc. So maybe you want to just share with us a little bit about who you are, what your background is. I know you've also got some special gifts that you're using in the work that you're doing. So I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Okay, my name is Lynn Monèt, and my profession, I've been a nurse for over 25 years, 17 of which I've done in end of life and palliative care as well. Oh, Jerry!
Oh man, what an ordeal! What a friggin' ordeal!
We just manifested you onto the show. Literally 30 seconds ago, we were both saying we manifested you onto the show.
I had to change my password that it was already on Facebook, and then they kept forever to change it. And it's like I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get on.
Well,
very happy to have you. Very happy. But Lynn was just telling us a little bit about herself. We've literally just gotten on a few minutes ago. So thank you so much for joining us, Jerry. I want to just hear, Lynn, a little bit about your background. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, it's perfectly fine, Jerry. I'm so glad that you made it, because you're really the star of the show here. I'm just, the backup. So,
not really. So, what? I've talked to you before, right, Chantelle?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. So your people are familiar with what I have to say. So, basically, I'm going to just lead in and then turn back over to Lynn. So I've been studying the voices that schizophrenics hear for you guys there?
Yeah, I think you froze, Jerry, for a minute. Okay.
Look at this. Something doesn't want this to happen.
That's exactly what Chantelle and we were talking about that just before you came on. that there's interference. Do you have any sage or anything that you can like put a little sage or?
Yeah.
Chantelle, let's put a block of light around him and protect him for whatever it is, and kind of remove it from the. There
you go.
All right. I got sage if I need to use it. So
okay.
I'll just start off and then turn it over to Lynn because she's the backup for what I have to say. So
I'm the backup singer.
I've been studying the voices that schizophrenics hear for more than 2 decades, and they run particular patterns. And most people can't see or hear them. You know, I've spoken to them. I can't see them. I can't hear them, but I can feel them. Okay, they run a series of set patterns, and if they run patterns, they can't be what the psychiatric mafia says, which are hallucinations. Hallucinations are all over the place. Okay, so what's different with Lynn is that she's coming at it from another angle. She has actually seen these things. I've got other people who have heard them and recorded them. Okay, so just with that outlook, the voices are not hallucinations. They run specific, repeatable patterns, and if they run patterns, they can't be hallucinations. So Lynn has seen them. Okay, so I'm going to kind of turn this over to Lynn, let her tell her story, and I'll be jumping in from time to time.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. As I had mentioned, I've been a nurse for many, many years, and most of that's been in end-of-life care and palliative care. So I've seen a lot of people pass away. I've seen people leave their bodies. As I was talking to Chantelle earlier, the way that Jerry and I met, because I think this is more the direction that we would be going in, is that I had gone back to, I also have a degree in biological science in addition to nursing. I did go back to school to further my nursing degree. And during that time, we had to do rotations through the psychiatric ward. And just to back up a little bit, ever since I've been a little girl, I have had the gift of second sight. My siblings and my family and I, we all grew up 3 short blocks behind a hospital that was connected with what we called a nursing home, which is now called skilled facilities. So it was commonplace for us to see people in patient gowns that were dead walking through our house. It was like, oh, well, there's a clock, there's the door, there's a dead person. So, and so we weren't afraid of them. There was one, for instance, that my brother and I were in my parents' master bedroom, and I was, of course, 5 years old. He was 7, and I was in my mother's jewelry box. And I turned to show my brother how I had decorated myself in my mom's jewelry. And there was this misting, which I've since learned is called ectoplasm or plasma. And he was fixated on the wall. And into that stepped in his best friend, John's mother, father, and brother. And we both ran out of the room looking for my mother. It's like, to let her know that John was there. And my brother found her first. And of course, they came to the bedroom and there was nothing there. And my brother got in trouble. But the very next day, my brother went to school and John wasn't on the bus. And then John, who sat next to him in his classroom, wasn't there. And the teacher got up and she announced, after they said their Pledge of Allegiance and did the morning events, that John would be returning because he and his entire family perished in an auto accident the day before, and it happened that day. So growing up in the 60s, that's not exactly something that you talked about, because you would literally have the men in white coats picking you up and taking you to a mental facility to have a lobotomy. And as I grew up, when I was 10, I grew up as Presbyterian. My mother took a jaunt with another religion that was very, very, they were the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was brought in front of the elders because I was still seeing things. And I was petrified at 10 years old because they were telling me what I was seeing was demons, that I was possessed, that there was something wrong with me. So for many, many years, I ignored my gifts. I would still see things, but I would run out of the room just as fast as anybody else, afraid of it, thinking that it was a ghost, because that was now what I had been taught. So moving forward as a single mother with 2 children, I had purchased a house that I wrote my first book about, Omnipresent. And that house was so haunted that I never moved in. I bought it, never moved into it. But with that, I was able to connect with people of like mind, which then made me realize that I wasn't so strange after all, that there were people like me. And I then went to nurture my gifts again, and I wasn't afraid of them again anymore. So with that being said, to come back to the period of time when I was going back to school, I did a rotation through a psychiatric ward, and there were patients there that I could see attachments on. I had one, for instance, that I contacted Jerry for because I had been talking about it with people, and they're like, "You've got to call Dr. Jerry Marzinsky. You've got to get in touch with him because he's this guy who knows all about that stuff." And that's how Jerry and I connected. And I'll be happy to share the story about the girl if you'd like.
Oh yeah, go ahead. So,
okay.
And anything else you saw in that psych ward at that time.
Okay.
Because these people they're hearing voices, and these voices, what they taught us in graduate schools, oh yeah, they're just hallucinations, just ignore them. But when I got onto the front lines and working in one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet, it sounded to me like one side of a telephone conversation. These people were arguing with their voices, they were talking with their voices, but it wasn't word salad like I had grown to believe in college, where they were saying, oh yeah, they're just hallucinations. You think about hallucinations and they're like random, they're all over the place. These guys were carrying on coherent conversations with these voices. They were arguing with them, they were challenging them, they were yelling at them, but it was all like one side of a telephone conversation. You could hear their side, but you couldn't hear what was coming in. And right. I remember when I first saw that, and it happened time after time after time, these conversations were coherent. They made sense from one side of the telephone, but nobody could hear the other side. So they weren't random garbage like the psychiatric mafia is saying, that these voices are nonsense hallucinations. These voices are affecting their behavior. And it was very clear at the time that when they listened to those voices, they got in a lot of trouble. And a lot of them didn't want to listen to them, and they were arguing against them. There was one lady who was walking off of the hospital grounds, arguing with the voices the whole time, saying she didn't want to do that. So it was very clear that these voices affected the behavior of these patients. And the psychiatric mafia and their allies in the universities that are teaching this same kind of garbage, that these things are hallucinations, believe that these things are just garbage. They don't make any sense. And their advice is to just ignore them. And I checked with patients after I heard the psychiatrist tell them, just ignore them, they're hallucinations. I brought those patients back in a while later and said, how's that working for you? They said, it's not working at all. They got louder. They got more persistent. Ignoring them doesn't work. And they're telling them all kinds of stuff. Usually it's negative stuff. It's you're no good, you're crazy, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're never going to amount to anything. Nobody likes you. People are talking behind your back. Every rotten thing that you could imagine is what these voices tell these people. All right. And they hear it like virtually all their waking lives. Now we all hear them. What they sound like is.
Sorry, I want to just interject here and just ask you, would you say this is only for patients with schizophrenia? Or do you think that this is also relevant to other serious mental conditions? I'm well aware that obviously other serious mental conditions, you're not always hearing voices, but there's certain, I want to say, belief systems, labels, etc., that get put onto people. And then that sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. And I mean, I certainly don't want to undermine whatever people are going through, but it just seems to me that it's not only the voices. It's like when we're looking at serious depression, stuff like that, it's almost like the character of the person changes completely. And there'll be different conditions as well, where literally the people's character changes in a massive way, but it's not necessarily hearing voices all the time. but do you think there could be certain entities that attach themselves to these people and literally infuse into the person and make them believe that this is truly who you are?
Yes, I think that's true. That's very true. Now, there are a couple of things. You brought up a couple of topics. One is that DSM, that Directory of Psychiatric Illnesses. All right, these are labels that they don't have any cures regarding them at all. What the psychiatric mafia has done was got a whole series of human behavior, broke it up into segments, and pathologized it. There is not a single objective test for any one of those diagnoses. None. They're all subjective. And the psychiatrist goes, oh, well, it looks like this, and they'll put that down. They have to have that for the insurance, you know. Right. But it looks impressive. I mean, you open up that book and here's all these numbers and categories and subcategories and da-da-da. I mean, it looks like a work of science, but it's all a work of fiction. That's what it is. Totally made up.
But you know what I also find very interesting is that there are so many people that I've seen who actually like being, I want to say, diagnosed or labeled. Right. So the minute that a professional has given them a diagnosis that says, okay, you are that or you are that, and now take home this box of medication because that's going to fix you. I think that gives a lot of people a sense of comfort in many ways, right? Because I know what's wrong with me, and now these pills are going to fix me. Even though the doctor has to change them 400 times a month, this is going to fix me. I've noticed this a lot, especially with people around here, you know, where I live. I mean, you go to the clinic over here, these people have no idea what they're actually telling me. I've sat there, I've observed this while I've actually sat there waiting for other people. And I've seen how that works. So that just occurred to me. So I'm just interested in what both of your take on that is actually.
Well, those drugs don't cure anything.
Right.
You know, all they do is they dumb down the patient. They're basically major tranquilizers. Okay. So with these labels are they're stigma. You know, they're not real. They've made these things up. You know, and some of the other things there's like 297 of them right now. They started out in 1952 with 106. In 1980, they had 256. You know, now they got 297. So they have this group of psychiatrists that meets once every few years, and they said it was like a tobacco barn where they all get together and some guy comes in and, well, I got a new diagnosis. It's this, and these are the symptoms. And half of that group is associated with big pharma. So they think, well, can we make some kind of drug to treat this thing? And they vote these things in and they vote them out. You know, so if they don't like them, they vote them out. You know, so they vote on it and then they add it to this Bible, and they charge a fortune for this Bible. They treat it as a Bible in graduate school and in psychiatry. You got to memorize these things. So like, these are real. They tried to turn them into diseases, but they failed. Okay? Now, so they're a subjective bunch of bunk, and like I said, 2/3 of the psychiatrists on the board are responsible for making these things up, have strong ties to pharmaceutical industry. So
absolutely,
there are no blood tests, there are no lab tests, there's no X-rays, there is nothing to verify any of these diagnoses. You know, there's no objective test. It's basically left up to the opinion of the psychiatrist. You know,
right?
And this thing it's been debunked by. Here's John Rappaport, a psychiatrist. He says every mental disorder in the DSM is defined by a list of behavioral symptoms that committees of psychiatrists have debated and decided which clusters of symptoms add up to which labels and mental disorders. So there's no objective test for any of it, you know. So it's like a falsity. basically for insurance purposes. Now, with regard to these things attaching to people, it's not just the schizophrenics and other mental people who hear these things. All of us hear a voice constantly gabbing in our heads all the time. It tells you stuff you know, stuff you think, stuff about other people. It's judging other people. It's blah, 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 blah. That's constantly running. All right. People think that that's who they are. That voice in their head. Now, if that voice running through your head is you, then who's listening to it? Who is listening to it is who you are. All right. So that voice that's rambling in your head is similar to what schizophrenics hear, only their voice is very, very negative, and it's telling them rotten things all the time. And it's running a series of predictable patterns, and the first pattern is negativity. These voices are constantly negative. They don't say anything good. And if they do, it's only to turn around and stab them in the back later. The voices are anti-religious. They can't stand these people reading the Bible. I've had patients tell me that when they read the 23rd Psalm, these voices react like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. Why would a hallucination do that? Why would a hallucination care if the person went to church or read the Bible? Right. And they create negative emotion. And then if you talk to these people enough, I've talked to hundreds of them, you'll find that before the voices come, they have so much energy. After the voices leave, their energy is gone. So these things are parasites. They actually suck the energy out of these people. So they have to turn their mental state negative before they can take that energy. Okay?
Right. Exactly.
So Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, lived 300 years ago. You don't hear psychiatry or psychology talking about where thoughts come from. They don't touch that with a 10-foot pole. They have no idea. So the brain is like a radio receiver. It pulls in these frequencies. Whatever frequency you're on is kind of what you're going to hear. So depressed people are going to hear depressed stuff. Happy people are going to hear happy stuff. So you tune it in. And you tune it in by what you pay attention to. So the Native Americans said you got 2 coyotes or 2 wolves on each shoulder. The one that grows is the one that you feed.
Yeah, okay? Exactly.
But with schizophrenia, it's like that tuner is broken. You can try to turn it, and then these entities turn it back again. So it keeps them tuned onto a negative frequency. So you have to fight to turn that dial back onto a positive frequency. But we all hear these things. It's not just schizophrenics. Like you could be standing on the edge of a high bridge and go, I wonder what it's like to jump off, or I wonder what it'd be like to turn my car into oncoming traffic, or just some wild thought that comes out of nowhere that doesn't belong to you, because you would never think a thought like that. I mean, it doesn't belong in your thought stream. You recognize it as foreign. Driving your car, somebody cuts you off and you go nuts, or somebody irritates you and you go, well, I'd like to punch them in the mouth or beat their head in or something like that. Those thoughts don't come from you. So Swedenborg says they come in from 2 sources. They come in from a heavenly source, which usually speaks in feeling and intuition. It's not words, unless the person's on the verge of death. On the other hand, the negative ones come in words. Okay, they don't have to have your approval to come in there. They just barge in there. Swedenborg says you got 2 guardian angels watching over you. They can't interfere with what's going on in your life unless you give them permission. They're not allowed to subvert your free will. The negative ones are. So what we're talking about here is energy, which freaking the psychiatric mafia has no idea what that is, nor does psychology. Everything they're thinking about is physical drugs, physical illnesses, and they've never found any of these illnesses in anybody's body. It's all behavior oriented, and behavior is energy. So what they're basically doing is, like, if you had a magnet, you can't see that magnetic field. You can't feel it. You can't smell it. You can't hear it. None of your senses tell you there's a magnetic field there. So if you get a jar of iron filings, you put it on that magnetic field, now you can see that magnetic field. So what the psychiatric mafia is doing is saying, yeah, these energetic voices, these energetic mental illnesses, depression, bipolar, and the whole list of them, they're trying to make you believe these are physical. They're not.
Right.
So the result is like you get a bottle of Thorazine and you dump it on that magnetic field and you expect that magnetic field to disappear. That's energy. It's not going to be affected by physical drugs. What they're doing is drugging the friggin' brain. They're gorking these people out. And a lot of these drugs, especially the antipsychotics, are actually rotting out their brains. People who've taken these in the state hospitals, when they've done autopsies, their brains are shrunken like walnuts. And when the drug companies and the psychiatric mafia found that out, that researchers had found this and saying, we suspect it was your drugs, they went, no, it's not our drugs. It's schizophrenia that did that. It's not us. And then they gave the same drugs to monkeys and rats and saw that it shrunk their brains also. So aside from these drugs not curing anybody, they are destroying the person's brain and they're rotting out their peripheral nervous system. They even have suicide warnings on some of those antidepressant drugs. And a lot of these shooters that killed a bunch of people were taking antidepressants at the time. So these are mental illness is an energetic thing. Okay.
I agree.
And these Swedenborg says you have two demons and two guardian angels attached to you all the time. You're the decider. You're the one who decides which ones you're going to listen to. And that's your choice. What you tune into is the direction you're going to grow. So if you tune into spiritual stuff, you're going to move in that direction. If you tune into negative stuff, you're going to move in that direction. And I'll tell you, we got a listing of 23 patterns that these voices run. Anybody can see them. So what they did with these mental disorders, they threw them up. First they blamed mothers, and you could see mothers went, hey, we didn't do this. This isn't our fault. So they kicked it up into genetics. They said, oh yeah, all these mental illnesses is due to some genetic disorder in the person, but they couldn't find one. So finally the geneticist came out and said, listen, we can't find a schizophrenic gene or a gene for mental illness. So that blew that out of the water. So then they went back and they said, well, it's not just one gene, it's a whole bunch of genes, and we can't figure out what's going on, and we don't, it's in there somewhere. It's got to be the genes, but we can't find them. So once that was kicked out and they could no longer use that, they got away with that for decades. Then they kicked it up to, well, it's a chemical imbalance of the brain. So one of the first things I saw when I went to work at the state hospital is they never gave any kind of, or took any kind of baseline before they gave their drugs. So when they say, okay, there's a chemical imbalance of the brain, you go, well, what's out of balance and by how much? You think you'd need to know that to treat that imbalance. They don't have anything to measure the chemical imbalance of the brain. They don't even know what the balance of the brain, the chemical balance of the brain should be. This is more bull crap that was made up by Eli Lilly back in the 70s when they came out with Prozac. It was a lie. They knew it was a lie at the time, and they published it anyway. Now they're teaching it in the universities, and psychologists and psychiatrists by the tens of thousands are coming out believing that mental illness is a biological entity. It's not.
Right.
It's been definitively disproven, which turns us back over to Lynn, who has energetically seen these things. So I'll let her talk about her experience on the psych ward.
Yeah, I have. And Jerry, I totally agree with everything you've said. I want to mention something that Chantelle mentioned, and I hope I'm saying your beautiful name correctly. When you were talking about dealing with people there, I'm also dealing with people here that I'm taking attachments off of. Some of them, Jerry, they're huge fans of Jerry, and they've contacted me because they've seen me on their show, on shows with him, and removing those attachments from them. But you're right. And this doesn't have anything to do with medication. It's like they're seeking a title for what they have. And once they get it, it's like a Band-Aid that they want to hold on to. And even after you've removed that attachment from them, they're still clinging to that behavior that has become habitual for them to do, which brings them comfort, but they don't realize that they're leaving themselves still open for reattachment, if they don't also change the way that they're thinking. So, and again, and back to what Jerry was saying, and also with definitely the medication isn't helping. And on the flip side too, not just mental illness, but people that are getting close to their time to pass are also seeing visions that they're claiming are hallucinations, and they get the Seroquel out and they start dragging out the Buspar, medicating these people who are talking about seeing spirits on the flip side as well. So
their relatives. They see their relatives come to see them, and they're happy about that. These guys break out the Seroquel and dose them down until they're drooling.
Yep. The Buspar, you name it. That is true. And so, with that being said, with my ability to see them since I've been little, as I had made mention about the young lady in the mental facility, I had gone into the mental facility with seven other nurses. There were 8 nurses total with a teacher. And while we were standing there waiting for the teacher to get the assignments for us, this young woman that appeared to be like 20 years old, she was in her early 20s, she approached the group of us and she pointed at me and she said, "You can help me. I know you can." And of course, I'm looking over my shoulder and I'm like, "Oh, please, don't be talking to me," because I didn't want to be Lynn the weirdo that day. I wanted to be Lynn the student nurse. And of course, I'm standing with all of these people that have no idea, why she would be pointing me out that way. So the teacher came up and she said for us not to make eye contact, not to speak to anybody, and she moved us out of the room.
See, I want to comment there too, because that's bullcrap. It's like if you look them in the eye, they're going to attack you. I mean, like they make it scary. The whole time I was working 45 years on the front lines, I never saw a researcher on the front lines ever. And then they're scaring these people to death who do come onto the mental ward, kind of like, "Oh, if you look at these guys, they're going to attack you. I mean, it's very dangerous. You're going, you might die. We got to protect you." I mean, it's a bunch of crap. It's a total bunch of crap. They won't let researchers onto the line to research the front line to see what's actually going there, because we got it's dangerous and we can't risk the insurance thing, and no, we can't let you in there. Same thing with the prison. Same thing with the mental health centers. They won't let honest researchers into those institutions. You've got to at least have a master's degree to get in there, and it's clear what they're hiding once you do get in there. They got the outside of the institution beautiful. You get in there and it's a psychological garbage pit. It's a sewer.
It's something that's very controlled, right?
Very controlled, very ugly.
And you don't want to speak up because you don't want to be admitted either, because if you can't go in there and start saying, "Oh, gee, I see dead people," you'd end up being admitted as well.
I had the same problem. When I was here talking to these people with the voices, and I would talk to the voices through them, like they would be the interpreter. I couldn't tell anybody. There was nobody I could talk to. So I was in the same boat as Lynn.
Yeah, and another thing that had happened, I'll go back to the young lady, but on one of the other days that we were there for a whole week. We'd gone into this section that was basically, it was a very sad area because even the nurses commented how these people's families didn't even bother to come and see them anymore. They were basically forgotten there, and they were going to live out their lives in this facility with not even somebody coming to hug them or to visit them or to bring them anything. And there was this lady that was sitting at this round table, and she was having her coffee, and she was having this conversation with other people at the table, but they were ghosts. They were spirits. They weren't people. And so the nurse says, and she says, "Oh, well, that's so-and-so." And she's talking to people that aren't there. And I'm looking at the table and I'm like, "Oh, no, she's not. She's got 3 people sitting with her." And the thing is it's like Jerry said too, it was like she was talking on a phone. I could hear what she was saying to them, and I could get the gist of what they were saying back to her by the way she was responding. "Oh, is your coffee good? Is it hot enough?" I mean, she was being a wonderful hostess. And so but of course I couldn't speak up and say, oh no, she's not. She's got people sitting with her, because they would have admitted me. But back to the young lady, I was then placed back into the area that we originally started, and it was the intake area. So we had to sign papers that if we got hit or bitten or attacked by somebody, that we wouldn't be able to hold the facility responsible. And I was there with another nurse. So there were two of us in there, and they had picnic tables that were bolted to the floor. And I was sitting there with my fellow nurse, and we were documenting on our patients that we had. And the young lady comes and walks over, and she sits down with us, and she's sitting next to me, and she's telling her story about how she was molested by her pastor from like age 10 to 14, and then her mother got remarried, and her stepfather started raping her, and then she ran away when she was 16, and she got involved in devil worship type thing, and then she realized that that wasn't for her, and now she's hearing 25 different voices. But the thing was, is this young woman sat next to me. She had on shorts and a top showing her midriff with spaghetti straps. So you could see her skin in a lot of places. And she was absolutely covered in claw marks. And the reason why I'm saying claw marks is when I purchased a house as a single mother that I had mentioned that I was never able to move into, during the time in that house, my best friend was clawed to the point of bleeding while she stood next to me in that kitchen on her back and stomach by a demonic force. And it was a demon, it was a hell dog that came through with the portal of the ectoplasm, that was ectoplasmic wall that was coming in on us on the kitchen. So
I've seen that also.
Yes.
I've seen that happen to patients also. Claw marks across their back that they could not have possibly done to themselves.
Right. And so, and they look like cat scratches. They're thin like that. So after seeing hers, I recognized these marks on this woman, and there is no way. I mean, she had them coming out of her ear, out of her nose. She talked about how one of them had a very long fingernail that was scratching the inside of her female parts. And the institution was claiming that they were self-inflicted. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, there is no way on her back and her that she can even reach that without being a contortionist. There's no way that, I mean, maybe some of them, but not, not where the ones were positioned on her back.
See, they're totally out of touch with the spiritual world. For them, it doesn't exist. For psychiatry and psychology, in the 8 years I spent in higher education in those areas, they never mentioned spirituality once. No. They never mentioned spirit once. Nothing. It was all physical bullcrap. And as Lynn's saying, this is all energetic stuff. As I'm saying, it's the same thing. Right. These are energetic, negative entities, and they're not going to be affected by physical medications. Yet they're making $4.7 billion a year selling antipsychotics, 4.7 there, and another 4 billion selling antidepressant drugs that are doing nothing except destroying these people. It's crazy.
It is. And the thing is as we were sitting there, they have periods of time where they call the patient away for their counseling group, they have group meetings together, or sometimes they'll see their doctor or they'll meet with their social worker. And they had called her away. And as she got up and started to walk away, I'm looking at her, and it was like over each shoulder, like a Santa Claus bag. And it literally was almost as large as a standard size pillowcase. It was that big, of these clustered together like grapes, but they were misshapen like potatoes. And some of them were inverted. So the eyes were on the bottom, the mouth were on the top. They were some sideways over each shoulder. And I'm like, oh my God. That young woman really is hearing 25 different voices. She's got attachments on her back. So she went to her appointment and came back. And her room just so happened to be 3 doors down from my patient's room. And I saw that she had returned, and I knocked on her door frame, and she invited me in. And I said, look, what I have to tell you, I said, if you repeat this, they're going to think that you're even more crazy, and they're going to keep you in here longer. I said, but I believe that you are hearing 25 different voices because you've got attachments on your back. And she's turned to start to walk away from me. And the way that they were connected, it almost looked like this this twisted horn type thing that was kind of a tannish brown color that attached at the top of her shoulder and clipped under her armpit. It didn't go all the way around. So it was elevated a little bit. And at that time I was like, well, you know, I've got personal things going on. I don't really want to I don't want these things coming home with me. So I didn't want to remove them at that time. But, and you know, as you know, removing things too, you have to prepare. You have to be rested. You have to have your salt baths. You have to have your auric field in full force before you go pulling these things off of people, because you could end up taking one home. So, but something just came over me, and I took my fingers and I reached them underneath them and I lifted them off. And I was really surprised at how easy they came off, but they immediately started falling to the ground. I started stomping them into the ground. They were kind of rolling away. And the girl turned around and she said, it felt like you were pulling grass off my back. She didn't even know, because I didn't touch her. It was all energetic. You know, I mean, with my fingers, I actually physically went through the motion, but I didn't touch her skin. And she could feel that. And so I told her, I said, look, I said, this is a temporary fix. I have pulled some of the attachments off of you. Some have rolled over by your bed. I wasn't able to get all of them. I'm sure you have some in your home. I said, but when you get out of here, you need to go and find someone that can remove these attachments from you when you leave. And lo and behold, I did run into her about a year later in a store. And she looked totally different. She recognized me. And I mean, having those things removed from her, she did go and find someone, and it did change her life for the better. She was actually in school becoming a dental hygienist. But, and she was off most of her medication. She was only on a low dose of anti-anxiety medication that she would take as needed. So she was off all of that, but her skin was pink and she had this beautiful blonde bob, whereas before she was ashen colored. They were draining her so badly. But the thing that was, another thing is that as I walked around the facility, since we were there for a whole week and I was placed in different sections, I noticed that there were these different kind of attachments that I call archons that were fixed on people's backs with addiction. Some of them looked like crabs, spiders, or reptilian. And sometimes the reptilian ones would have a tail like a lizard or alligator, and sometimes a human buttocks and no tail. And I would see them attached to these people. They would fit like neat little backpacks, and they would be anchored, and their feet would be anchored at the hip area, walking around the facility. And I went to several of them.
Do you have your drawings of those things?
You know what? I am out of town today. I'm not at home, but I do have the drawings in my book. But I would walk around the facility and I'd say to my fellow nurses, hey, by chance, does your patient have schizophrenia? Yeah. How'd you know? And I mean, I literally only got it wrong once because one of the people had issues with hearing voices and was an addict of an alcoholic. So, you know, they had both, and that's the only one that I had missed. And so I started to realize this, and also in my own family, you know, my brother had the archon on his back. There was the reptilian one with the human buttocks. And the thing that's very distinct about these archon things is their heads are very, very small in proportion to their bodies. They all have a fin type feature that starts at the top of their head and goes to the back of their neck. And it looks like a dolphin fin, but it's floppy. It's not rigid and stand up. And you can see them because sometimes they go from the ceiling corners and things like that in people's houses. Especially if, like in the case of my brother, who he had been clean for 20 years. And then the sad thing about the archons versus the schizophrenics is the schizophrenics, they're not really invited. When you are an addict, you are inviting that into your life. And so that archon will detach when you stop your addiction, and you're the one that has to clear that up, but they never leave your realm because they're always hovering, waiting to reattach. That's why they're whispering for you to go ahead and have that drink, that it's not going to hurt you, because they had a good thing going. You know, they've been able to suck off of your life and all of the negativity that your addiction has created, the sorrow, the job loss, the divorce, you know, all of the fighting that it caused. And they're eating that like candy. And of course they want to stay attached to you. Of course they want you to continue the addiction. So they're constantly trying to trip you up. And that's why it's so important for people who have an addiction to keep up with their support group or some sort of, connection with somebody that helps them to stay on track.
I've also heard with alcoholics I had one, he was an Apache. He was so violent, they sent him down from northern Arizona into the prison where I was working in the psychology department. And he was like kind of like a bad, evil medicine man. He would cast spells on people and stuff like that. And he hated white guys. So it took me about 6 months before I could talk to him. Finally, I got the courage up to ask him, well, if you can do all these weird things, how come you can't stay sober? He said it's because of the spirits of dead alcoholics. They haven't left this realm. There's one bar in Phoenix, he said, that these dead alcoholics were piled all the way up into the sky so high you couldn't see them. He said if he went anywhere close to that bar with any kind of alcohol in him, he said they would jump him and they would demand that he drink. So if you look at what alcoholics say, they go, well, I can have one drink. And what they need to realize is that they're not the only ones drinking. Right. These entities, they can't get drunk in the spiritual form. So they need to attach to somebody in order to get that high of being drunk. So if you're having a problem with alcohol, it's not just you who's drinking. It's these other ones that have jumped in there and they're going, yeah, keep going.
Right.
And they lose control.
And that's with medication, pills, and everything. When my daughter when I was going through that house issue with the haunted house, and I was having multiple sources come trying to clear out the issues that were in the house, because I bought the house, I signed on the dotted line. It's not like I could say, gee, the house is haunted and I want to give it back. When I purchased it, I didn't know it was haunted, but you can't just go and give a mortgage back for something like that. So I was trying to have different denominations of religion and things like that to come through. And there was one in particular that came through that was American Indian. And my daughter had been complaining. My daughter was 13 years old. So she wasn't drug seeking. She didn't even know. I didn't even smoke cigarettes around or anything with my kids. And I was a single mother. So I didn't have medication in the house other than like Tylenol and Advil. So she was complaining of this horrible pain in her back and shoulder. And I thought maybe it was because her book bag was so huge and literally probably weighed 35 to 50 pounds. So I kept trying to treat her with the Tylenol and stuff. I got her a rolling backpack so that she wouldn't have to carry it along with her anymore. But the pain didn't subside. And this went on for weeks. And there was finally one point, it was a weekend, it was a Sunday night, and she was complaining of pain so bad, I thought, maybe she's got a clot or something wrong, a tumor or something that's causing this. I maybe need to take her to the hospital. And it just so happened, I called in from work to stay home, and she ended up falling asleep. And of course, if she was comfortable enough to fall asleep, I wasn't going to wake her. But the very next day, I was meeting this American Indian at that haunted house. And when she arrived, I had my daughter with me because I was going to take her to the doctor, after meeting with these people. And the lady gets out of the car and she said, first of all, if your house had been built over 3 feet from where it was, it wouldn't be haunted, because she explained about the ley lines and the vortexes and how negative that, how they use that to travel. But she said, is your daughter complaining about pain? And I didn't even mention it to her. I didn't think it was significant. And I said, yeah. And she says, in her shoulder. And I said, yeah. How'd you know? And she says, well, she's got an attachment. And I said, it's been hurting bad. And she says, I'm not surprised. And it's a big one too. And she energetically took her hand and removed it energetically and threw it into the ground and stomped it along with her friend. And she asked me, she said, ask your daughter how she's feeling, how her shoulder's feeling. And Brittany was a distance away from us because it was a large front yard. And I called out to her and I said, Brittany, how's your shoulder feeling? And she starts doing this. And then she starts waving her arm like this. And she says, it's fine. And I'm like, so no pain at all, nothing. And she says, no, it's gone. And she never had pain again. So not only do these attachments attach to people that already have addiction, or that are invited by the addiction, but sometimes they will attach to an innocent person, creating pain. And the person seeking relief for the pain will become addicted to a substance when maybe they wouldn't have ordinarily been an addict. So this is another thing that can happen too energetically with some of these attachments.
Lynn, you said you were treating some other patients that came to you. Could you tell us about some of those you treated?
Wow. Yes. Some of them have been coming, hearing voices, and a lot of them, they've had attachments. Some of them have had several attachments on them. But the thing is even after the attachments are removed, and it's not, what they don't realize is that it's not just a matter of removing the attachments. There's a whole dynamic that goes with it. In addition to that, for one thing, their environment needs to be cleared of negativity, and also other people in the house. If they're doing things that are also drawing in attachments or drawing in that kind of negativity, you can take it off of one person, but it's not going to, eventually it can come back. So it's like rolling out the red carpet for them to return when you're removing this sort of thing. But the thing that I have found in some of the cases is that some of the people have become so attached, as Chantelle was mentioning, to the label of having the label given, and their habits of the way that they were coping with that don't change after you've taken the attachments off, and they're still trying to deal with life in the way that they did in the past instead of moving forward. New is almost bringing that energy back into their life.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's where it's making it very, very hard, to remove. And even like when I go into homes of people that say, oh, well, I've got a demon in my house. And for some reason, everybody thinks that if they have a ghost in their house, the first thing that it is a demon. And 99.9% of the time, it's not. It's a disembodied soul. It's poltergeist. It can be a lot of other things that it's not. But what they don't realize is, even if I come in and clear your house, or if I take attachments off of you, if you don't make personal choice changes for the better in your life, it's not going to stick. It's not, you've wasted.
Exactly.
You've wasted. Exactly. Yeah. So they're having trouble with that part of it, of making those life changes once they get that clearance. And it makes it very, very difficult. And I'm finding that over and over, because they've had these issues for so long, they've become almost comforted in a weird way.
Identified. Becomes their identity, right?
Exactly.
Becomes their identity. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
It's so interesting. I want to just also add to that. We must never forget that our body is a resonance chamber. We are created from sound, frequency, and vibration. Yeah. So when we are vibrating on a lower frequency, a lower resonance, of course, these things use our body as this absolute food bowl, if you will, right? Yes. And it's so true. I cannot agree more, and I cannot agree enough with you about when an entity is removed, because I do a similar sort of thing. And I must say, what I use a lot in my work as a healer is the Tibetan singing bowls, because these things cannot deal with the high frequencies and the low frequencies and the vibration. They dislodge within seconds of that. But it's so important that you have to then raise your frequency. And it's like you become lighter. I always say it's like when you raise your frequency, it's like suddenly you become like a cloud. And the lower rung frequencies is a rock. A rock cannot hold on to a cloud. So it's going to try, but it's going to lose its grip. You are vibrating higher, and these things on a lower realm cannot touch you anymore. So as you are then raised up, it is so important that you then keep your frequency high. And that is through being joyful. That is through doing things that bring you joy. So, and when you start, you can't for a minute go back into those old ways and think that you're not going to get attached or reattached, because they're waiting for you. They love your flavor. You, their favorite flavor. They're waiting for you, right?
They're your candy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So it's so important, and it's so true what you're saying as well. I want to just add that your entire surroundings, your home, you must clean your home. You must keep your body clean. You must sage your place, whatever it is you do, right? Whether you're praying or saging or whatever, but you have to raise the frequency of your entire environment. So
and
whether it's exactly, and that's how we get rid of these things. That's how we no longer make ourselves accessible to these attachments. That is what I've observed my entire life as a healer, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I love what you guys are saying, because it's so, so, so true. And it's like seeing these different attachments on people. I've seen many, and as you can imagine, in Africa as well, Africa's got its own brand of attachments. I can tell you something. You talk about the buttocks and the reptilian tail. Absolutely. And snakes, lots of snakes.
Yes.
Lots of snakes.
Whoa, they love the snakes. And you've got to uproot it. You know, it's not just about, some of them like grow literally into the cells, into the organs. And it's not just like, you can't just mow it off like you're mowing a lawn. You have to go in there, dislodge it, and uproot it like a weed. I mean, in the Eastern traditions, they call it the sankharas, the miseries of the mind. So you've got to like take them out like weeds, and you then have to replant your garden of flowers, if you will. Right? So you start growing a different energy. You start cultivating different frequencies within your body. I love what you guys are saying. It so resonates with me.
I had one person that I recently went to take an entity off of, and there was literally a root that was going through her spinal column into her abdomen, even though the thing was on the outside. And it had been there a long time. So it was hard to get rid of. But like you were saying too, you know, you do bring them to a higher vibration, which is really where they're naturally supposed to be, but it's almost like they become afraid of the unknown, so they reach back into the you know, the older stuff, and it's just the whole thing. But I didn't mean to get us off path with what Jerry was talking about, but no, I agree with you on that. I totally agree.
There's also a new energetic therapy that's coming out of Australia right now called the Mace energy method, that will go in there and it will dissolve these traumas that people have, and it does it very quickly. Lynn has experienced it.
Yes, it's actually Jerry did it on me. He's like, well, you want to let me do Mace on you? And I'm like, well, sure. You know, I mean, all of us have our traumas, we have our stuff. So and mine took a while. It took several hours, but he was so thorough and very patient. And after we were finished, what it was like for me, and it really works, everybody, it does work. What it was like for me is that even though you don't forget the trauma, you're not connected to it anymore. So you don't,
consciously.
You don't you don't react because of it. And what it's like is it's like standing outside looking in a window at the event instead of being physically in the event. And you can look at it, you can say, oh, that's terrible, those poor people, you know, and then you realize that you were in that too, but you don't have that flight or fright or anxiety from it that it creates, and your buttons aren't pushed as much whenever something of that, you know, of that nature, you know, comes up. You handle it differently. So I was very pleased with the way that it worked for me. It was excellent. Jerry's an excellent, definitely he does a very good job with the Mace and helping people with that.
Yeah, and there's it's hard for people to get to guys like you, and there's not a lot of you out there. But there is a place where you can reach Mace therapists who are in different countries, and the address is www.maceenergymethod.com/about/.
But Jerry can do it even over the internet. He did mine over the internet, and it worked just as well. So you can reach out to him too.
Right. Yeah. I'm booked all the way to March now.
Well, you'll be booked,
overwhelmed.
You'll be booked to March of 2025. You're good. So you can handle it.
Like we're saying, these are energetic entities.
Yeah.
Memory is energetic, thought is energetic, feeling is energetic.
Right.
Your sight and sound and hearing, that they're all energetic. I mean, if your spirit is energetic, if your soul or your spirit leaves your body is just a lump of garbage. I mean, it just rots.
Right.
So
right.
Thinking that these things are physical problems and drugging people to death with these toxic drugs that don't work, because they have the money to put out this advertisement I mean, what they're doing to the planet is a travesty. It's destructive. I mean, they're not helping people. They're destroying them. There is a place for those drugs, and that's with psychotics who are so violent and so out of it that they can't be handled in any other way, or the same thing with prisoners. But for the average guy, for the average person who's depressed or anxious or whatever, the normal psychological problems, Mace works great, and it has permanent results.
It does. It does. It absolutely does, and it helps you seal some of those cracks in your windshield. I say windshield, and which are areas that are trauma that also invite some of these things in. It doesn't necessarily invite them in, but it leaves the cracks in the windshield that they can have more access to you in that sense. We all have that auric field, and as Chantelle had also mentioned, it's important to keep your house clean, your body clean, and all of that sort of thing clean. But your auric field needs to be clean too regularly, and you need to make sure that you have no cracks in it, because the things will rebound off of it if you have a strong auric field around you that way.
And when you're vibrating on love, and when you're vibrating from a place of peace and joy, and really that is, the first thing in my experience when I've worked with people, is that let's take responsibility for what created this lower frequency within you to begin with. We all have attracted that to ourselves, right? Whether it's conscious or unconscious. If it's an unconscious thing that happened as a child or before you were able to even understand what was going on, let's go and clear that. And it's easy to clear that when you understand and when you're willing. It takes a willingness. Firstly, it takes a willingness to do that. And secondly, then it takes a decision to want to make the change in your life. And that decision is not always easy, because it means you've got to discipline yourself. And people don't really like to discipline themselves. And I'm not even talking about swatting yourself over the shoulders like in a hectic way. I'm talking about if you've got addictions, you've got to understand what it is your addictions are covering. And when you're going to, let's say you're stopping smoking, even if it's addiction like smoking, I mean, there's a ton of emotions that your smoking buries, right? So it means dealing with those emotions as they surface. And most people don't like to deal with their emotions. They don't like to deal with their pain. They don't like to deal with their fears. So they look for other things again. I mean, I've been looking people that are coming off drugs, right? Or some after they've come out of rehab or something like that. They might be off the street drugs, but now they're sitting on a ton of pharmaceutical drugs again. I mean, you go to the average AA meeting or NA meeting, right? I've sat in on a few of those as well. Every 20 minutes they're taking smoke breaks, right? And all they do in their smoke breaks is talk about the meds that they're on. So now they're medicated to the hilt again on pharmaceutical meds. Now they're off the crazy stuff, or the street drugs, call it that, but now they're on other drugs. So you've really just transferred one addiction to the other. So the bottom line is really, we have to have the courage to go, and I work best with those people, I'll tell you that, the ones who have the courage to go cold turkey, because with that, it's you deal with the issue at hand and you can heal the issue at hand very, when your mind, it's all mind over matter. When your mind has decided to do something, the body is very forgiving. The body heals in a heartbeat. It really does. The cells replenish themselves and replace themselves. And suddenly you become a healer for others. I mean, I'm a healer. So I love people that have been to hell and back and coming out and willing to change those traps, if you will, because then you can recognize another's traps without judgment, and coming from a place, not an intellectual person that sat for 7 years studying the books and thinking you know it all. No, when you've been there, you've done it, you've felt it, you've come out of it yourself, that's when you become the best healer for those. And really, at the end of the day, it's all about raising your frequency and then following your life's purpose. When people start following their life's purpose, they align with their divine self or their higher self or God. They then get to understand what their life purpose is. And the minute they've got their life purpose, you love what you do and you do what you love, and everything else follows you. So that, for me, has worked amazing miracles over the years, is to get people to understand what it is that keeps them trapped, make a decision if you want to change it, discipline yourself to do it, replace the bad habits with good habits. And it really, that's how you grow your inner strength as well. And from that place, you become the person that you're meant to be. And then you don't have depression, you don't have addictions, you don't have all sorts of crap going on in your body and in your mind.
That is
yeah,
so
one
true.
of the best ways to do that is get on a positive spiritual path and stay there.
Yes.
Something that's going to carry you. It could be Yogananda or Swedenborg. There's a Swedenborg site there that talks about heaven and hell and how all this works. You can go to offtheLeftEye.com, and there's hundreds of videotapes on Swedenborg's teachings. He was a Christian mystic, lived some 300 years ago. He talks about where thoughts come from and how they affect us, and how you have two demons assigned to you and two angels assigned to you, and there's always a war for your mind, your decision going on. He explains it all, but we can remove a lot of these things, but if you don't get on a positive spiritual path and stay there, and you stay in the same frequency that you've always been, they're going to come back. And the Bible even talks about that. Yeah, you can clean out the house, but if you don't refill it with something good, they're going to come back with 7 times the amount of demons. And it's true. I've seen it over and over again with a lot of the patients I worked with. They think, oh, well, I'm good because they're gone now. No, you're not. You need to keep working and moving forward.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I agree with that too. Also speaking of hallucinations, and on the flip side of of what's considered the mental illness, which I don't like putting that topic on it, but that's the medical thing. It's as we've said, it's more of an energetic thing. On the flip side, when people are getting ready to pass, they're also heavily medicated because they're supposedly hallucinating. And I've had so many, for instances, happen right in front of me that can't be disputed with people that are getting ready to pass that are being said hallucinations when they're not. So if you'd like me to share any of that, I'll be happy to do that as well.
You know what I'd like you to share, Lynn, is I remember I was talking to Lynn one day, and she said, well, my mother passed just a few days ago, something like that. And I'm looking at her, and she's like she is now. She's all bubbly and happy and full of energy. And I'm like, well, how can that be? Her mother just died. Tell the story of what you saw when your mother passed. She was with her mother at the time.
I have a different take on death and dying. I don't see death. I see death as a rebirth instead of I see it as something that should be celebrated, and not. We don't die. We will see our loved ones again. So if you can kind of put it in that perspective, that this is not the last time that you're going to see the person, it helps a lot. My mother had cancer, and the thing about people before they die is a lot of times, well, first of all, there are 3 kinds of death. There's natural death, which most of us have, sudden death, and near-death experience, and they're all handled differently on the other side. In the case of my mother, it was a natural death, and she a lot of times people, they know when they're getting ready to pass. They'll start saying things like, well, will you take care of my cat if something happens to me? In my mother's case, she went around the facility telling people goodbye and that she was leaving to go home tomorrow. And that she even told one lady who had had her dog put down 3 days earlier that she would take care of the dog for the lady until the lady could finally cross over and retrieve the dog. So, and it just so happened my mother did pass away the next day at around 1:30 in the afternoon, but I was the only person there. And my mother, sometimes people choose to leave their bodies early and then just let the physical body finish, sometimes even a day in advance. Some choose to stay in the body until the last minute. My mother chose to stay in until the last minute. And this was obvious because even though she could no longer verbalize and she could no longer open her eyes, she was moving her eyebrows up and down and trying to mouth words, and it was appropriate. People would come into the room and say, "Hi, Phyllis," and she would, in response. And this all comes into play with some of the things that I saw, so that's why I'm mentioning it. So as I sat on the other side of her bed in a recliner, I noticed there was the portal misting of the ectoplasm that just filled wall to wall, ceiling to floor. And I could see movement on the other side. Sometimes I would see a shoulder peek out or a pant leg peek out and that sort of thing. And yes, everybody shows up in clothes. I think it would be pretty shocking for most people if their mother showed up naked to help them transition over. You'd be like, "Mother, please get some clothes on." So another time they do. I've only seen one naked ghost and he hadn't crossed over. But anyway, so when they crossed over, they do show up in clothes. So as the misting was there, it started to efface up towards the head of my mother's bed. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, we called her Grandma Girl, stepped into the room and she looked the exact same. And that's just it too. They will look similar to what you saw them last. I don't mean in a sick way, like for instance, somebody that's had cancer that's maybe lost a lot of weight. You'll see them as you saw them last in their healthier form. So you're not going to see that person that way. So with my grandmother, she walked in. I mean, she literally presented even with her glasses on. I mean, her little curly perm, her leisure suit that she had made herself. And she walked over to the bed. My mother was sitting at a slant. And I, of course, was there with her on the opposite side. And my grandmother starts stroking the inside of my mother's forearm. And she leans forward and she says something in my mother's ear. And my mother did the mouthing thing and the eyebrow thing as my grandmother moved away. And as people are transitioning, the filters efface. So they're able to hear the telepathy from the spiritual world communicating, as well as they can hear the speech from the embodied world also. They can hear them both when they're in that transitional state. And so my grandmother did this 3 times. And as my grandmother's standing there, I see this frantic wave. And it was my beautiful sister, Robin. She had been murdered by a jealous boyfriend when she was 20. And her perfume filled the room. I mean, she wore a unique perfume back in the 80s. And it just flooded the room. And she came around from everyone. And she actually embraced me. I could feel her hair falling over my face. I could feel her essence. I could smell her. And then she went back around. And when she went back around, the whole wall had effaced. All of the ectoplasmic wall was gone. And I could see in to this beautiful reception that they had prepared for my mother. And there were hundreds of people there. Some of them I recognized from this lifetime that had already passed. Some I did not, but my mother did when she passed. She knew everybody. And so my mother's laying there and I said, "Mom," I kissed her cheek. I said, "Mom, I love you. I'm going to be okay. It's time for you to go. Grandma Girl and Robin are here to help you cross over." And she started mouthing and the eyebrow thing to me. And she literally took her last breath in about 10 minutes. But as I'm sitting in the recliner before this had happened, after I told her that it was time for her to go, I'm watching the festivities go on. And of course, there are colors there that you can't even imagine here. And the feeling of the elation and love that came from that other side, there are no words that can explain it. There's no feeling that can touch it. There's just no way to describe it, but it's something so amazing. So as my mother, I noticed a group of spirits towards the head of my mother's bed, kind of like in an American game. In America, we have a game called football. And when they play football, they get into a huddle, which is where a group of them kind of come around in a ring and they huddle in together with their heads. And they were at the head of my mother's bed doing this. And all of a sudden I noticed when they stood up, my mother was standing there in the circle, like they were stabilizing her spiritual feet. And she was beaming. And the thing is when you're in this elation, you can't help but smile. You can't. I mean, it's just so much love coming at you. So I'm sitting there smiling, and I'm seeing all of these people coming and greeting my mother. And my mother was so happy to see them. And like I said, even ones that I didn't recognize, she knew who they were. And all of a sudden it hits me. I look over and my mother has stopped breathing, and I'm smiling from ear to ear because to me, she's not dead. I can see her, standing there greeting all of these people and overjoyed, but I caught myself and I'm like, oh my gosh, I better call the nurse, because if the nurse were to walk in, my mother's just stopped breathing. I'm sitting here smiling. That's not a normal response. They might think that I put a pillow over her head or something, I mean, so I called, the nurse came through and she pronounced that my mother had passed, and she walked through all the festivities, and the spirits just kept on doing what they were doing. And I said, can I stay here for a little bit? Because I wanted to watch. I mean, they were in there for a good 20 minutes. Our time, of course, time on the other side, it's not exist. They don't have time like we have. We're linear here. Their time is timeless. So, but in our time, it went on for 20 minutes. And as my mother was greeting with people, the room started to fade, people started to fade out, and it just left a couple of them, my grandmother and my sister. And the thing was too, is that there were some beings there that were, there were angels, there were loved ones, but there were these other beings there that were very, very tall. They had white luminous hair. They looked to be at the level of angels, but they didn't have wings. But they were so tall that their heads were almost halfway through this 10-foot ceiling that they had. And the thing is that they appeared to be from somewhere else. And I say this because with as many stars as there are in the universe, that there are solar systems around, it would be ignorant on our part to think that we are the only living species in the entire universe. And we are energy. And if you want to take it from a scientific level of energy, can't be created or destroyed. So when those other beings pass away and finish their lives on whatever planet they're on, they also have to have somewhere to go. And that's why I'm saying these beings look like, some of them looked like they were from somewhere else, but there were also ones, like us. But the thing is that I don't know if they were male or female. It didn't matter. They were just gorgeous. What they radiated was just all love. And they all walked out past me. They filed out past me, and I could see my mother in her patient gown. And the way that I see spirits is that out of my peripheral vision, I can see them as clearly as I can see you. And when they're at a distance, they're kind of opaque. Like, for instance, if you're walking towards a plate glass window in a mall and you see your reflection, they look like that to me. But when they're very, very close, it's a waffling to the air. And sometimes I can see like a lower half. And in my mother's case, she had beautiful legs. So as she passed me in her patient gown, I recognized her beautiful legs as she passed. But it is something that I never grieved my mother's loss. And of course, I'm in communication with her frequently. I asked her, I said to her one time, I said, Mom, don't you miss the taste of potato salad or the brownies that you used to make, or some of the dishes that she used to make? And she comes through like a megaphone and she says, we don't eat here. And I'm like, well, yeah, I know that. And she says, well, but we do everything by thought. She said, if we think of some place that we want to go, we instantly are there. She said, and when it comes to food, all that we have to do is think of it, and it comes to us, the flavor and the sensation, as if we are eating it. And I'm like, well, man, wouldn't that be great with ice cream? You can eat all you want and not have to worry about the calories. But because I experienced that and so many other things with other people's families and people being in end-of-life care, palliative care, I've seen hundreds of people leave their bodies. I've got hundreds and hundreds of stories of even people in that transitioning state where they've come back into their bodies after transitioning, and they're talking about even seeing children that haven't been born yet. And it was, and it turned out that the girl was pregnant and didn't know it at the time. So I've been able to be part of all of that. And I love that so much, being able to be a part of it, that I wrote books to be able to hopefully share with people and take the stigma of death and dying away from them. So, but again, the medical field, they start talking about seeing ghosts in the room, they come running with the pills, and the pills don't work. And I've got many stories that could even validate that as well.
Wow. So Lynn worked in a hospice, so she's seen hundreds of people pass by. And I've worked with hundreds of schizophrenics who were hearing voices. And those voices are not hallucinations. So, for any of you out there who are working with schizophrenics or have schizophrenics daughters and sons, you can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Go under articles, and you will see a listing of the 23 patterns that these voices run. And again, if they're running patterns, they're not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists.
Right. I agree. Wow. Absolutely. Very, very interesting. I love that because, Lynn, I think we were, and Jerry at our last conversation also spoke briefly about that. I've also had similar type experiences for me, seeing beyond the physical eyes. And I love that as well, when people leave and understanding that they going to a much better place. My fiance was killed in a hijacking, and I had a similar experience. Yeah. When I went to identify his body, it was just that experience of, I'm not gone, I'm right here. It's only my body. And from there, and it's because of that experience, I literally do the work I do today. I always maintain he died for me, because it was that experience that brought me to what I do today. So, death can be something that really is gives you life. It rejuvenates your life, and we can see it in a very different light. Or can be something, in South Africa, death is no, we live in a very violent country. So death is no stranger to any of us that live here, really. And I just decided at that stage, there was no ways I was going to become another statistic in this country. Where you become bitter and angry, you choose to see it in the way that I believe God wants us to see it. And from that moment, we can choose to have it revive our spirit and kind of like work with the experience, rather than have that experience suck the life out of you.
That's true. That's true.
And
you become empowered. If you're not afraid of death, nobody holds any power over you. Somebody comes up to you with a gun and says, "I'm going to kill you." Oh, okay. Go ahead.
And you also know that that person cannot kill you unless you've in fact given them permission to do so on an entirely different level.
That's true.
You can, you will leave this earth plane when you choose and you've decided to leave the earth plane. And that's why, whenever anyone leaves the earth plane, and no matter how they leave it, right, we have to respect that is their choice on whatever level, in whichever way they've chosen to go. So really,
See, there's a tie-in with schizophrenia on that too. Is I've had scores of people who were hearing voices write me and say, "Thank you. I thought they were hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia said, and they're not." And there's one guy wrote, he said, "Now that I know that they're not me, that I can handle this."
Yes.
And people who are hearing voices have to understand that those voices are not who they are. We're told from the time we're kids that every thought that comes into your mind belongs to you. That's far from true.
That's true.
And Sherry Sweeney said that any negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from the dark side. And the voices are not, they don't belong to the person. You know, the problem is if you don't understand that and you believe that that voice is your mind talking to you, you become that voice. If you listen to it and you follow what it says, you become it. You become crazy as a bed bug. You know, it's them that are trying to drive your behavior into that lower vibrational frequency that they feed off of. And you could call them the archons, because they, you know, they're constantly filling your mind with negative junk to bring your frequency down so they can feed off of that negative energy. They can't feed off of, like Chantelle was saying, they can't feed off of positive energy.
No,
they have to, it's negative energy. And you look what's happening on the planet right now. I mean, I can tell you that that list of patterns that the voices run, the psychotic voices run, it's the same crap that's coming over the mainstream media around the planet right now. The same exact patterns that the schizophrenics are hearing, that the psychotics are hearing. This is insanity raving over the planet right now. And it's the same beings on a giant energetic level, a macroscopic level.
Yep, you're absolutely right. You know, would you mind if I, Jerry, if I share the story of Edna just for people, the Edna, the blind lady?
No, go ahead.
To bring that home. Because people, and again, the hallucinations are seen both at the time of dying as well as for schizophrenia and things like that. And this brought it home for me and proves that they're not hallucinations. I was on my unit. I had a patient named Edna that was transitioning, and her son and daughter came to the nurse's station and they said to me, "Mom's talking to people in the room that aren't there." Well, first of all, everybody's taught to be afraid of the ghost or the woo in the room, you know, so even the children come running to get the meds to shut their parent up because they're uncomfortable with them talking about seeing dead people in the room. But anyway, they came and they got me, and I expected it because she was transitioning. And so I walked back. I said to them, I said, "Well, you know, let me walk back with you to the room and see if maybe I can get something to make your mom, you know, feel more comfortable." And so I walked back to the room, and Edna's sitting in a slant, and she's just smiling. She's so happy, and she's reaching up into the sky as if she's receiving something very delicate, like snowflakes. I mean, she was handling it so carefully. And I said to her, I said, "Edna," I said, "who's here?" She said, "George." And the thing about Edna was she was totally blind. She had been blind for 10 years, couldn't see shadows, couldn't see light, nothing. She was totally, totally blind. And so when she said George, her daughter turned as white as a sheet and had to sit down, because she's like, "Well, George is my father, and my father's been gone for X amount of years." And Edna pipes up and she says, "And he's glad that you're taking good care of Pixie." Pixie was Edna's poodle. When George died, the possession of the poodle had to be taken over by her son because Edna couldn't care for the dog being blind since George was gone. And a poodle was still very much, it was an elderly dog now, but still very much alive. And the son told me the story, and he said to me, he said, "Well, do you think that my mom's hallucinating?" And of course, as a medical professional at work, I can't come back and say, "No, I think your dad's here, you know, helping her get comfortable with to help her transition over." So I had to turn it around, and I said, "Well, do you think that she's hallucinating?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, do you mind if I try something?" I said, "I'm not trying to change your belief system. I've experienced this many, many times where loved ones do start to come in to help, you know, help their loved ones transition over. Do you mind if I try something?" And he's like, you know, "Yeah." So I asked Edna, I said, "Edna, can I ask George a question?" And she nodded her head yes. And I said, "George, what color is your son's shirt?" And Edna said, "Yellow." Now keep in mind, she's totally blind, and he was in fact wearing a yellow Ralph Lauren polo shirt. So George gave her the answer of yellow because she did have those filters effacing and she could hear them. And the thing about when a patient is transitioning, people miss a very, very special time that they could actually communicate with the other side themselves through the person that is transitioning because of their ability to hear the telepathy as well as the human communicate, the physical embodied people's communication. And, you know, you think about how many times somebody says, oh, I wish I could just tell somebody that I love them one more time, or tell them, you know, I'm sorry, or ask Uncle Bob what he did with the clock. This is your time that you can do that. However, you've got to stay in a space of love and positive feelings, because the spirits have a tendency to step back if someone is sad or grieving, because their energy exacerbates that. It increases it, and they don't want to increase any kind of sadness or feelings that way. But if you can stay in a neutral state, you can actually ask questions and get those answers. So, but I thought, you know, as far as hallucinations, how does a blind person hallucinate? They can't see.
Right.
So that was my, you know, that was my argument. I mean, how can she see her dead husband and she's having a good time communicating with him? You know, there's no way, if she's blind, that she could be hallucinating. And that's what brought it home for me. So I like to share that with people.
And ladies and gentlemen, I have another show coming up shortly. So I want to just say thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you so much, Lynn, for joining me this evening, or this morning for you. Jerry, I'll see you again next week, same time, same place.
All right.
And I hope you have less problems getting on next week than what we experienced this week. Yeah.
And if your readers want to find more out about the voices, they can get this book. It's on Amazon. It's on lulu.com. Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. It'll tell all about how we came to the conclusion that the voices were not hallucinations, and what the real story about what psychiatry is. Okay. Lynn has also written a very interesting book also, but I don't think she probably has a copy with her today.
Not with me today, but you can get a hold of me at my website, www.lynnmonet, lynnmonet.com. My books are for sale there. I'm on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I'm all over the place, even Walmart. I just recently shot a segment on Beyond Belief with George Norrie for Gaia that'll be coming out in March, and hopefully I'll be returning there soon to do something, another one. So
if you want to just send me all that information, I can just put it in the description as well, so people can just check in the description.
I will do that as soon as when we end the show. I'll make sure that I send that over to you right away.
Yeah.
That'll be
and
great.
I think mine is on the bio if you still have it. I could send you another one. Okay.
All I know, Jerry, all your stuff is in the description already from the bio and the last show we did. Lynn will certainly be popping yours in there as well, so you can just send it to me.
Thank you so much.
Everyone can just go and click in there. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Is there anything else you guys would just like to say in closing?
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jerry, too, for inviting me. This has been great.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, indeed. Very interesting. And I love the way you guys think. I mean, it's absolutely true. Resonates 2,000,000% with me. So I hope lots of you guys, our viewers, have gotten a lot out of tonight's show. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. And I shall see you soon. Jerry, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.